Can you still succeed as a contractor in today's content design job market? Listen to me today as I interview someone who's done exactly this. Welcome back to Writers of Silicon Valley. I'm Patrick Stafford, your host. It's coming into a busy period for content design where we've got a conference coming up this month, Growing in Content. We've got Button coming up next month. I'm recording this in August. It's coming out in August. So I think we're coming out of a bit of a quiet summer in the Northern Hemisphere into a pretty packed time for the industry as a whole. So I'm pretty excited. If you haven't already booked your ticket for Growing in Content, you should. The first day is free, and there's going to be heaps of great speakers there. So would definitely check that out if you're looking to learn and just get in touch with a whole bunch of people in the industry. And would definitely encourage you to check out the Button conference as well. Every single Button conference has been fantastic, and there have been just some of the most influential and supportive talks I've heard, but also the community there is fantastic. Christina Halverson puts on amazing conferences, so would definitely encourage you to check it out. I know the price is not easy for everyone, but if you can wrangle training budget or any type of money to get there, I would definitely encourage it because the recordings are definitely worth it as well. I'll be honest, I'm getting pretty exhausted at this point in the year. We're now 8 months in, and yeah, it's pretty tiring. So apart from Writers of Silicon Valley, I'm running UX Content Collective, and we have workshops and courses going all the time. And I feel like at this time in the year, I don't know if it's just me, but I feel like I get start getting pretty burnt out. So just a reminder, sleep more. I should take my own advice. I definitely encourage everyone to just sort of pace yourselves, and I really should take my own advice on this front. I don't know about you, but I'm one of those people who, I feel like if I'm doing nothing, then I feel really guilty. That's probably something I should deal with. Anyway, just before we hit the interview today, just a reminder that the content design and UX writing job market is still doing really well at the minute. And well, I mean, it's certainly doing better than it has in the past couple of years. I don't know if we're back to 4 years ago during COVID. That type of massive pace for hiring, but there's still a significant number of jobs out there across all different expert levels and in a variety of different roles. So if you're looking for a job, there have been a number of different people hired over the past little while who have experienced layoffs, certainly in my own sort of anecdotal circle. I know that's not representative, but yeah, just a word of encouragement that there's good opportunity out there. And something I'm also hearing from a few of the hiring managers that I've spoken to is that they see more jobs opening up down the pipeline. So within the next few months, there might even be more opportunities coming. So if you're looking for a move, perhaps, or you're still looking for a job, I'd just encourage you to keep going because the opportunities are definitely there. I'm thinking about having some hiring managers on the podcast in the next little while. That might be a good opportunity to just check in and see how the market's going and a job market health update. Anyway, on to today's episode. So the person in today's episode is someone who I have been speaking to for quite a while and actually I've worked with for a little bit. And I think she is probably one of the most impressive people I've seen in the industry in terms of personal branding. And she really understands who she is and what she's doing and has a pretty impressive career track. So the person I'm speaking with today is Slater Katz. Now, you may know her brand as the UX girl or UX gal, as she would say. And she got into the content design industry just before COVID, sort of end of the 2010s. And she quickly ratcheted up some pretty great roles, contracting roles in companies like Netflix and Fitbit. And her story is pretty inspiring. And I talked to her today about not just her entry into the market and how she's been able to succeed and thrive, but also how she's been able to thrive in these contracting roles. So for a lot of content designers, sometimes they see, and not just content designers, but anyone in tech, it can tend to see contracting roles as a little bit of a leash or a cage around what you can do. But it's interesting speaking to Slater and hearing her describe these contracting roles as really great opportunities that allowed her to thrive and get a lot of experience. And they can really be a great advantage if you use them in the right way. So we speak about that today, how she got into the industry and a little bit about her personal branding and so on. And I think she's just a really impressive person, not just if you're thinking about getting into the industry, but if you're already in and you're wanting to think about how you can sort of stand out from the pack a little bit. I definitely recommend listening to what she has to say. So that's it from me. Once again, listeners get 20% off anything at UX Content Collective. So head over there for anything you might need training wise. Podcast 20 is the code you should use. And there's a great slate of workshops coming up, and there's courses like accessibility or content testing, anything you might want from a content perspective. Even if you're not working as a content designer, I think there's something there that you can take advantage of and learn from. So uxcontent.com, podcast 20, and that's it from me. Hope you enjoy the interview, and I'll see you at the end. Way to phrase that sentence. One of the things you've really impressed me with is your ability to build an audience. So you've got your you had your Gig Gal thing going on, sort of rebranded into UX Gal, and I've seen your posts on LinkedIn, and I think you are very smart in the way you go about announcing who you are and what you do, and just like just in terms of like branding yourself. So like at the end of each of your LinkedIn posts, you'll say like, "Hi, I'm Slater. I do this, I do this, I do this," and it's clearly worked. You've been able to gain an audience from it, and I that really struck me because like I feel like we talk so much about like personal branding, right? Like you want to get a job, you need to brand yourself. You need to have a brand, and it can feel a little. I think sometimes people feel a little bit intimidated in doing that. To you, it seems like it comes like really naturally, and that's what really came across to me whenever I saw your post for the first time. I was like, oh, this person knows who she is, and what she wants to do, and what she's good at. So I'm interested to hear, like, in terms of that whole, like the Gig Gal, UX Gal, is that something that you where did that come from? How did that come about?
Yeah, no, I'll first start by saying being active on LinkedIn, especially in the beginning, even still now, did not come naturally at all. It's like, it's still, I don't know, my whole relationship with LinkedIn is tumultuous. But yeah, how the Gig Gal, now UX Gal, kind of came about was really kind of taking the next step in my self-employment journey. So I had been freelancing for the past, while, and I wanted to kind of venture into the creating content space because, freelance is trading time for money, and, it's a great way to live a cool lifestyle. But just wanted to kind of take the next step in that journey. And so was pretty active on LinkedIn for freelancing because that was really how I got clients. Was I'd post about, UX writing, my niche, which for a while was fintech. And that's kind of how I got the ball rolling. And that's just kind of like, I got comfortable with it. I got my reps in, because in the beginning, which was probably like 2019, it's crickets. It's like, network's not that big, but just kind of kept at it. And then for the UX Gal, when it came to that point, it initially started actually as me trying to help people become freelance UX writers, and then it kind of evolved into more of like general UX writing, content design, education type thing. But in regards to like how I developed the personal brand on that, it was a total learning journey. Not something that like came naturally. It definitely a lot of trial and error, experimentation, a lot of learning from others about, value propositions and how to position yourself, and, figuring out the best way you can help others. And so one thing I think I did very well in the beginning was I created a ton of content all free. So I really think that helped build trust up front.
I think it's also like I think what some people have an issue with, and I'm raising this because in the past, 18 months or so, like so many people have been on this job hunting journey and they have to compete with so many people.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of the time, I think some of the personal branding, quote unquote, advice can be quite shallow. And I don't think it has any real one-to-one relationship with whether you get hired in a job or not.
Mm-hmm.
Because if for many people, it's who you know rather than like people seeing your things on LinkedIn. I mean, I know so
Right.
many designers who have absolutely zero online presence, but will never be out of a job because they're so
Mm-hmm.
great, and and their network is so large. But I do think like it can be extremely helpful.
Mm-hmm.
Let's go back a little bit. So you came into content design from copywriting, right? Like
Yes.
more like traditional advertising. Yeah. So I'd love to hear a little bit about how you moved from copywriting into UX writing and content design, because you've worked at some pretty large companies, including some of the fangs. I know you've worked at
Mm-hmm.
Netflix, and so I'd love to hear, yeah, your journey in getting to content design, UX writing.
Absolutely. So actually originally started off in marketing, like right out of school,
Hmm.
and kind of went up the ladder there quite a bit. I was on like the kind of A/B testing, growth, experimentation side of marketing, and
Hmm.
actually ended up doing a lot of writing as a part of my job, and realized like that's where I got the most energy from. That's what I love doing. So my first career transition was marketing to copywriting. And my first job there was at PetSmart, actually doing packaging copywriting, which had,
Mm.
I didn't know this at the time, but actually had a lot of similarities to UX writing and
Hmm.
because in content design, because you are given, a finite piece of thing, a package, and you need to pretty much like figure out how to best communicate a very select amount of information while also taking into constraints like legal and things that need to be on the package, like nutrition information and things like that. Because PetSmart has 11 proprietary brands. So it was also managing 11 proprietary voice and tones and things like that. So that was a really actually cool experience that kind of set me up to become a UX writer and content designer. But after PetSmart, I went to back to tech and I landed in a role that I thought was just going to be copywriting, but ended up being copywriting and UX writing. And I fell in love with the UX writing side of things. It was like it felt so much deeper to me than the copywriting. I loved kind of the design element and being able to be more collaborative and really psychological and empathetic. And so I was actually laid off from that job. They laid off the company was owned by another company and they laid off our company. And so I was like, okay, I'm going to take this as an opportunity to pursue UX writing content design full time. And so after that, that's when I ended up at Fitbit, which was my first UX writing job contract, which was, I'm a huge fan of contract jobs and was a great learning experience as as my first UX writing job. I really kind of was dove into a good learning environment, is how I'll put it.
So you just mentioned you love contract jobs. So I think that's an interesting perspective, because I hear from a lot of people that they don't, a contract job is kind of it's a means to an end. So they'll get the contract job, but really they're crossing their fingers and hoping that it'll convert into full time. Why
Right.
did you like contract jobs so much? What was it about them that appealed to you?
Yeah, there are a few reasons. And also caveat that I come from I like variety and have a entrepreneurial and self-employment streak in me. So
Hmm.
like the switching of contract jobs doesn't bother me.
Hmm.
But there are a few reasons. One, I think it makes it easier to get into a FANG or a larger company. If your goal is to ultimately become full time, there is a lot of opportunity to transition. But I think typically with contract roles, they're looking to hire someone fast. So
Mm.
sometimes they're not looking for like the perfect person. They're looking for a good person. But it's, in my opinion, sometimes easier to get in the door if the timing all works well. That's
Mm.
one reason why I like them. And because you're able to get into like a larger company sometimes, and maybe like work with, some people who are the best in the field, I think it creates such great learning opportunities to get into those companies and learn how they work and just kind of network and all of those things. And for me, I liked kind of I am an employee, but also there are boundaries. So, I'm not going to be working overtime. And if I do, I get compensated for it. So I think there are like the delineations like that. Some might feel, they don't like, but I think there are benefits to it. Being more in control and having those boundaries. And that I'm not like Fitbit. I wasn't employed by Fitbit. I was employed by the contract agency. So yeah, and I just think like it also, since there is the opportunity to transition to full time, but it also creates opportunity to like, I know, job switching is kind of a controversial topic. I am a proponent of it, but it creates opportunities to job switch or job hop. That's the word, job hop, which can increase your salary. And there's not like you left your job, it's your contract ended. And so I think I definitely experienced benefits of job hopping in that way.
Yeah, the job hopping thing's interesting because I feel like now the market shifted a little bit after all the layoffs. I don't know if it's quite as easy to hop as much as it was, but I think you're right in general that getting into somewhere like a Fitbit or a Netflix or somewhere else, even just on a contract basis, allows you to establish some pretty good relationships. I know when I've worked with contractors before and it's been a good relationship, it is so easy for the company to just go like, just extend them another 6 months, because if they see the benefit, it's so much easier than just like going out to market again and having to find someone. And so you've just established those, relationships really easily. Can I talk a little bit about the work that you did at some of these companies? So like Fitbit, what you got to Fitbit and what were you doing there?
So yeah, when I was at Fitbit, I worked a lot on Fitbit Premium, specifically programs. So if you are a Fitbit Premium member, you have access to programs which are pretty much like, say, 30 days to better sleep or things like that. Okay. So they're kind of like mini apps almost within the app, and very, very content heavy because you're guiding someone. There's a lot of content as in like, educational information. There's a lot of content in terms of flows and things like that because it's a complex, like entire program within the app. So that was my main focus was the Fitbit Premium programs.
And what did you learn about? So you came from like marketing background, and you had this PetSmart job where it's kind of hybrid, and then you go into Fitbit, which I assume was sort of like pretty dedicated sort of content design, UX writing related. So you're going into that role. What is it like for you coming from that, like a content adjacent role? Because I feel like there are a lot of people who want to do content design or perhaps want to get back into content design, but they have to do a content adjacent role first. And then, so you've done that and then you've gone, cool, here's my content design job. I've got what I want. What was challenging for you in that transition? Was there any type of learning curve that you had to go through? How did you sort of, what's the word? Acclimatize yourself?
Yes. It was challenging because I was self-taught. So I didn't I kind of taught myself the ropes, which was in a way a downside because I ended up at some place like Fitbit and was like, I had a ton of imposter syndrome. I didn't have like the confidence of like a certification from UXCC or something like that. That would have been like, I know my stuff. So I had a lot of imposter syndrome, especially going from like copywriting to Fitbit. And thankfully there's another UX writer there and she was a great source of like mentorship for me. But I think it's funny looking back on my time there. I think there's a shift that you experience in your seniority as probably any writer, or designer. But for me, it was worrying about it being like good, as in like a good reflection of me versus what's right for the design and the user and the experience. So definitely in my early days, I was like, it was about me. I wanted to be doing a good job. And so I think some of my copy was maybe more marketing-esque versus more communicating what needed to be communicated because I was worried about it, being good or looking good versus being what needs to be done to accomplish and solve the problem.
That's interesting you say that, because I have experienced this before when working with people where, and I don't know if you did this, but if you're going to a critique, for instance, like a weekly critique session, you have to have something to show.
Mm-hmm.
And I've worked with people before who will go to critique and they'll go, "Oh, it's not ready to show. It's not
Mm-hmm.
ready to show." And I had to have a talk with one of my team members once and say, because this person had said that a couple of weeks in a row, and I was like, "If you have something, it is ready to show." Like
Mm-hmm.
you kind of have to get over the concept that it's not good enough.
Yeah.
Because there is a little bit of that imposter syndrome.
Mm-hmm.
There is a little bit of having to get over that initial thinking of people are going to judge me because this is
Yeah.
good or bad or whatever. And you just have to say up front, I'm brainstorming. I'm doing
Right.
this. I'm doing this. I
Mm-hmm.
like to see that as like I tend to view that as an opportunity. Like I would go into
Absolutely.
those sessions and I would go, you know what? I'm not as far as long as I would like. Can everyone please help me? I'm trying to connect some
Mm-hmm.
dots, because everyone goes through that same sort of brainstorming phase where everything
Yeah.
you've got is terrible and you're
Right.
just sort of having to move your way through it.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, it's an interesting point you raised that, a lot of the time you're focused on making yourself look good, but it's not really about you.
Yeah.
It's about the product, and you'll
Mm-hmm.
get there as long as you're transparent and sort of open about the process.
Yeah. 100%. I remember when I first started at Netflix, I was we had some work, critiques, like share what you're working on. And when I would share, I would be like shaking because I was so intimidated by the group of content designers that was there. But
Yeah.
ultimately, like, you're right, it's the opportunity to, like, that's how you learn and grow, is by putting yourself out there.
Yeah, and I think it's scary, right? It's
Yeah.
when I first started as a journalist, like straight out of uni, I got a job straight out of university, and I may have told this story on the podcast before, but I can't remember. But in the morning, we would have our editorial meeting, and we had a very small editorial team, and I had my editor sort of sitting right here, and who I saw as like very much older and wiser than me, and very intimidating.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Not really, he was a softie, but like I felt very intimidated.
Right.
And you would pitch stories. You'd be like, "Oh, okay, so I have this
Mm-hmm.
idea about this," and he would listen for on average about like 5 or 10 seconds,
Wow.
and then would legit just be, and like sometimes in the middle of you saying, he would just be like, "No," and that's all you would get. That's
Oh
all
my
he'd
God.
be like, "No, what's next?" And then you would have to have like, you know, 10 or 12 like ideas, and in those early days when I was just learning, every response would be no, and I might get one idea, that
Mhm.
he'd be like, "Okay, let's do that," or something.
Yeah.
And so you get over that fear of like being exposed to
Mm-hmm.
that. I'm really
Mm-hmm.
grateful for it because it exposes you to rejection,
Yeah.
essentially. And I compare that to like the critique you get in a UX critique or something like that.
Yeah.
UX is much nicer because you get people saying like, oh, most of the time, occasionally you get a jerk or something like that. But if you're using a framework like I like or I wish or something like that, then it can be
Mm-hmm.
much better. Though in some ways, like in UX, we are taught to be respectful, and we have this thing where
Mm-hmm.
like we have like agile uh, agreements where we say like everyone's doing their best and so on. I
Mm-hmm.
kind of like sometimes that can mask whether someone is actually pulling their weight or not. I kind of miss the journalism days where my editor would like he would say to me on Sundays, he'd be like, "What's going on today, mate? Your copy's a bit lazy. Like, it's this isn't as good as it could be." And other days he would be like, "Yeah, this is really good. Good job." And so I don't know. I like that type of brutal honesty without being mean. I don't know.
It pushes you, I think. It's hard, like,
Yeah,
almost when it's happening, but it does. It's because it's so transparent. It's there's no reading between the lines.
Yeah. Yeah, it
It's
can be brutal. Actually, can we talk about that a little bit? Because everything I hear about working at Netflix is that it's not a brutal environment, but you hear everything about the HR policy that like anyone can be fired at any time. I mean, I know that's true for like lots of companies, but Netflix has a pretty sort of has sort of codified that into
right.
its approach to work. What was it like working there? I've spoken to Ben Baron Nugent, who was there on the
Mhm.
podcast, and he seemed to really thrive in that environment. And I know that there's a very solid content design team there.
Yeah.
What was your experience like there?
Yeah. So I remember your interview with him coming out while I was at Netflix. So
Oh,
that's
right.
full circle. But I was a contractor at Netflix, so my experience was probably a little bit different than the full-time
Sure.
employee experience.
Yep.
No one got fired that I know of, and but during my time there,
That's good.
there was no like
That's good.
brutal like cutting someone off in that way. It was a very like upfront and I think mature environment. That's all I'll say. I think
Okay.
a lot of people who work at Netflix were more senior in their career.
Yep.
And so I think it felt like, sometimes at other companies you get a mixture of things, mixture of experience levels, ages, things like that. It felt like everyone, regardless of, age level or experience level, like kind of was there to do work. They were there with their, head on straight. And there was a level of, just like, not seriousness, but like, or intensity, but it's hard to put words to it. It's like,
They're not there to mess around. They're there
yeah,
to
they're
get the
not there
job
to mess
done.
with.
Yeah.
Yes, and there was definitely a like culture of that. Like people took their job seriously, I think.
Yeah.
And I think if you didn't take your job seriously, it was noticed.
Okay.
And maybe that's when you started to get into trouble.
Yeah, interesting. I think sometimes maybe the perception about Netflix is a bit more intense than perhaps the reality. Because you should take your job seriously.
Mm-hmm.
I'm interested. You were Fitbit, and then you were at Netflix, and then where did you go after Netflix?
That's when started my words. That's when I started my freelance journey.
Okay.
So Netflix was pre-COVID, and then COVID hit, and I was at Netflix during kind of the beginning of COVID too.
Okay.
So it was kind of during COVID, I moved in with my now husband in LA, and I went through a very transformational experience of, I'm not commuting 2 hours a day. We have more time together. I have more time for hobbies and things like that. And so at the time, remote work was a big question mark. Was this going to continue? Is this a fluke? And I think we really wanted to kind of take that under our control. So I told myself if I could land my first big client, I would take the leap, go freelance, and leave the traditional work setup. And so I landed a gig with Verizon, and I started freelancing.
So this is, I get questions sometimes about, whether it's viable to become a freelancer as a UX writer or content designer. And the answer I always give is that yes, it is, but you have to put in a ton of work to do it and do it well. And the everything that you've described about having to create a ton of content, having to brand
Mm-hmm.
yourself, you really have to approach yourself like as a business, and
Yes.
the work part of it is one part of like many.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know if there are many people who are sort of suited to that type of pursuit. So
Mm-hmm.
I'm interested for people who may want to freelance as a content designer or a UX writer. What did you learn from that experience that maybe if you could go back you might do again? Or what did you learn during that time?
Yeah. So it was a learning curve that I'm very proud and like glad that I did, because it was, transformational for me. If I could go back, one thing I did really that I think was really, really important back then was I read a book that of course, I'm not going to remember the name of, but if I do, I'll tell you, and maybe you can put it in the show notes. And it was kind of about branding yourself as a freelancer. That's probably the gist of it. And he talked about the concept of niching and getting very specific about the problem you solve, who you solve it for, the value you provide. Basically, thinking in terms of value, not just I offer this. It's not making it less about I can help you with, content and I can help you solve this specific problem. And I think that's what I didn't know that I learned then that I think was crucial to me thriving because if you just say I'm a freelance UX writer and content designer and I can help you, explain complex concepts with your sign up flow. If you are telling what you do and not showing what you do, someone's not gonna see that and be like, I need that. Especially with something like UX writing and content design, it's not, we're specialists. We're not necessarily generalists. And so I think you need to, and I worked a lot with startups. And so for me, it was crucial to articulate the value I provided because the person who is hiring me isn't a content design manager or even a product design manager. It's the CTO or the CEO, and they kind of maybe know the value. And so it was on me to really articulate, I help fintech startups. I can help you, explain concepts like, why someone should link their bank account and how that's not scary, or, asking for your social security number is secure. So there are specific problems in fintech that I could speak directly to because I had done fintech work at Chime, which was a savings and investing app, and Netflix. I was on the payments team and also did some fintech work with Verizon. So I had some experience, and so I could use that and be the clear option for someone versus a maybe option, and I'm not quite sure exactly what you do option.
It's interesting, especially because right now I think the market is heading towards more specialized jobs rather than sort of generalist jobs. I've seen, and this may be just a trend due to the state of the market, though I'm actually convinced it's probably a bit broader than that. But a lot of the jobs I'm seeing now, and we're speaking in April 2024, they are for specific teams. So you want like a content designer for the growth team, or you want a content designer for the billing team, or for that. So I think like what you're saying makes sense there. The other thing too, I think is interesting is that you've touched on what is probably the biggest issue I see with a lot of portfolios and case studies, where the candidate does not articulate the value that they're bringing to their potential employer, and so they'll write a case study like this. I rewrote this copy. I rewrote this, so I did. I wrote these standards for this, and I just look at that and I just think I have absolutely no idea. Like, that's very nice that you did that, but I have absolutely no idea of what the impact is. They're mistaking, and I harp on about this a lot, but I see it a lot where people mistake the solution for the goal. Like what is the goal? The goal is to, as you just articulated, you want to increase the number of people who have attached a payment method. Your goal is not necessarily to rewrite this particular string. So I think, I don't know, there's a need to think broader about the impact on the business. And at this point, I kind of just feel like in content design, that's table stakes now. Like, if you the discipline has matured enough now that if you can't do that, then you're at a disadvantage to everyone else, especially considering the amount of senior talent who are looking for a job right now. That was a large rant, but it's interesting that you put it that way because I completely agree.
Yeah. No, understanding the value and connecting that to business goals is relevant in so many things. Whether you're applying for a job, going freelance, even doing, something like UX gal, communicating value is an underrated skill. Even if you're just go ahead.
No, sorry, go on.
I was saying, even if you're just in a conversation with, you're in a conversation with a product manager, communicating the value of what you're trying to convince them of. It's an underrated skill.
Absolutely. I think like one of the things that really frustrates me is like an inability, and this isn't just among content designers, but if you're doing a job and you're trying to get things done, and this is a common complaint, I can't get things moved. I can't get projects moved along. A lot of the time it isn't necessarily the the particular merit of your idea or the practicality of it or anything like that. It's that you haven't connected it to the business goals. And if you're trying to convince someone like a product manager to work on a particular feature or a particular product, what they care about is not necessarily just the user experience. They need
Right.
to care about, business goals. And if you
Mm-hmm.
are able to articulate how your work relates to that business goal, you're going to have so much more luck because, well, it's not even luck. You're just going to have a better result because
Yeah.
that product manager is then going to go into their meetings armed
Mm-hmm.
with the knowledge of how they're connecting this to a business goal. And,
Yeah.
I speak to some people where I always encourage people, if your company is public, read the reports, read their financial reports, understand the overall business strategy of the company that you're
Mm-hmm.
in. Because
Yeah.
if you're able to say, like, well, in this 3 years, the company's going to want to do this. We want this market share. This helps support that.
Mm-hmm.
If you don't even need to like be an expert in it. You just sort of just need to be aware, like, what
Yeah.
are the principles of the strategy right now? Um, some companies that's easier than others. But
Mm-hmm.
and it is a little boring sometimes if you're not interested in that type of thing. But if you want to succeed, it is I don't know, I think it's the best way to do it.
100%. I think it is, again, very underrated. And I think also understanding the business goals, in my opinion, also helps you make a more effective design. Because I think when you're designing, you're balancing, user needs, but also you're doing it for a reason, and that's the business goal. So I think it's like understanding the business and where the business is going, what the business values, all those things can only make you better at your job.
Hmm. What made you successful at these companies in your freelance roles? Because I've worked with some freelancers who, um, fine, and I've worked with some freelancers who are excellent. So, what
Mm-hmm.
makes the difference between someone quality in that type of role, especially when it compares to, say, an employee? Because, as you said, the relationship is a little bit different to the company.
I think I'm going to ramble through it, so bear with me.
Ramble away.
I think it starts with like asking good questions and so you can
Okay.
understand the problem. So I think there's sometimes, say you're at a start of a project with a new client, they want you to do XYZ. It can be intimidating to push back and say, wait, before I go do XYZ, I have like 20 questions I need to ask you to make sure I can wrap my head around what you need, and what success looks like to you. Even asking these questions before even in like your first discovery call with them, so you can understand and then use their language that they use to create a proposal, and it's a whole chain of events. But I think starting with asking questions, not being afraid to do that, sets you up to deliver what they're looking for. I think sometimes, especially in remote situations, a lot of things get lost in communication. And so I think understanding the scope really well, asking good questions, communicating a lot throughout the process, not too much, but making don't just like, go away and do your thing and then they come back with a big surprise. I think it's because it's not, I don't even think it's about like talent sometimes, or years of experience. I think it's anything can be learned. And if you have asked the right questions and have the right mentality around things, clients are even open to like you learning on their projects.
Hmm.
So I think it's really just because I think also if you have those questions, you're going to bring the right mentality to the project, like you care. And I think when you care, that really shows, versus if you're just taking the project because it pays well or you need a project, that shows too. So I think like being excited and interested in it, you will naturally do a good job. And the things like asking the right questions and things follow. So kind of a soft answer, just like soft skill answer, but
But it's so important, right? Like
yeah.
I always get a little nervous when um, I had a guy work for me once where I would tell him about what we were doing, and I would say, "So I need you to do this," and then he would be like, "Cool, got it." I'm like, "Any questions?" He'd be like, "Nope." I'd be like, "Are you sure? Like, you don't have any
Yeah.
questions? Like, you don't have any questions at all?" And he'll be like, "No, sounds good." And I'll get it back, and look, a lot of the time it would be fine, but there were
Mm-hmm.
some times where I was like, "No, you haven't hit the mark here," and I think it was because he probably didn't ask enough questions.
Mm-hmm.
And comes back to the imposter syndrome thing, right? You were mentioning
Mm-hmm.
before. If you ask questions, maybe you're making yourself appear vulnerable.
Yep.
But think about like all the best advice when it comes to starting a new role or starting a new,
Mm-hmm.
no matter what type of job. It's always just meet with people. And
Yeah.
I had a great head of digital once who he joined, and for the first month just met with people and talked to them, and had
Mm-hmm.
his big notebook, and he would just meet from everyone from like heads of departments down to like the individual developers, and
Well,
he would just ask questions. Now that's
mm-hmm.
obviously for a role, not a specific task, so that's much broader.
Yeah.
But yeah, like you have to sort of get over that fear that like it's going to make
Mm-hmm.
you appear dumb. It
Yeah.
doesn't. It makes you actually appear really interested and
Yeah.
making sure you want to get it right.
Mm-hmm. And sets you up for success because you'll have the right inputs, so you'll deliver a better result.
Mm, mm. So, asking questions, lots of asking questions. What else made you successful at these roles?
I haven't reflected on this, so this is good self-reflection time. What else made me successful? I think like I mentioned communication,
Mm,
like being very clear and setting the right expectations from all throughout the beginning. But I think this is going to sound very vague, but like I understood the problem they were trying to solve. I wasn't afraid to be honest about like where I needed to learn or where I needed help.
hmm
And I think a lot of feedback I got from clients that I worked with is I felt like a member of the team. I felt like I was like a
mm,
part of them, even though I was, not there 100% of the time. They felt like I was really like an integral part of it. Like that one client I worked with named the sign up flow I helped them with like the Slater flow. And so I think,
That's good.
yeah, it was a great result. But I think having that feedback that like we feel like you're a part of our team made it's like a reflection of the value I added. And my explanation of how I added value is just like being fully present, communicating, asking questions, like doing a good job. But I think that's how you do a good job. I didn't do
Mm,
anything special or unique, work wise. I didn't have any, tricks up my sleeve. I just was very curious, wanted to solve the problem in the way that they also wanted to solve them. So, like connecting it back to business goals, I asked questions and, not just questions that, would benefit the project, but also, questioning them like, why are we doing it this way? And, asking provocative questions, because I think sometimes that adds value, not for the sake of being provocative, but for the sake of making sure it is the best experience for
mm,
everyone. So I think understanding how you add value is maybe key. I'm a very like, external thinker and I love collaborating. So I think making maybe like emphasizing those skills for me made people feel like I was a part of the team, which
mm.
is a great retention mechanism for a freelancer.
You've touched on something there um, that got me in trouble a little while ago about sort of being provocative for the sake of being provocative.
Yeah.
I made this post on LinkedIn. You may have seen it, and I don't know if you did, but I wrote this post that was basically like, I hate it when you're in a discussion and people slow things down by asking, "What's the problem we're trying to solve here?" And people took that as me being like, "That's a critical UX question. Of course, you need to ask that." And like, of course, absolutely, you need to ask that question. But sometimes when you're in the delivery stage of a product and you've defined the problem, sometimes people use that question as a proxy for, I don't like what we're doing here, which is
Mm-hmm.
very different. And so if someone says, what are we really trying to solve here? And they don't have like an answer or a specific critique in mind, I can like, it is so annoying to me. It's kind of like, I equate it to like, you're on set for a movie, you're about to film, and then you're like, I don't think my character would do this. And it's like, fine, that was 20 steps ago. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? And
Mm-hmm.
so I think like, and to bring it back to your point, it's like if you like sometimes being provoked, I think sometimes designers who want to make a name for themselves equate being provocative with being
Mm-hmm.
thoughtful, and that's not
Mm-hmm.
those two aren't
Mm-hmm.
necessarily the same thing. So
Yes.
if you're aware of business goals and
Mm-hmm.
you're going, and I've seen this from you because you're working with us a little bit, and so like I've asked you to do something, and you'll come back to me and you'll say, "So I know you're trying to do this. I actually don't think the thing you asked me to do is going to help you do this. Here's something that I've done that I think will achieve this goal more." Right? That is thoughtful provocation. That is understanding the goal that you're trying to accomplish,
Right.
and it isn't just being sort of provocative for the sake of it.
Right.
You're attaching it to um, something larger,
Yeah.
which I think is important.
100%. I think people catch on to stuff like that. Like you're saying is,
Yeah,
when you're provocative for the sake of being provocative, but there's no substance behind it, or you don't have a rationale, or you don't have anything to like show,
yeah,
or like a hypothesis, or, I think people are like, well, I think it's an easy way to lose respect, in my opinion.
100%. Because you come to the critique, these people are the ones who show up to critique, and they're always like they always have negative things to say. They
Right.
never have any. They never have anything positive,
Yeah.
and that's not necessarily even a bad thing necessarily. But it's always just like it's being contrarian,
Mm-hmm.
and for the sake of it, and it just never results in good experiences.
Yeah.
I That's why I always go on about the I wish method in critique, which I
Mm-hmm.
love,
Mm-hmm.
and a former manager taught it to me. Um, I just think it's just so helpful because it forces you to put your feedback in actionable ways, not just
Yeah.
like I don't like this. I wish
Mm-hmm.
this was more like this, or I wish blah blah blah. But like at some of these companies, like what was the critique like, in that type of situation? I don't know if they had sort of critique sessions like that. Not everyone does. But what was we're talking here about brutal honesty or,
Right.
being very forthright and so on. What was the critiques, like at Fitbit or Netflix or Verizon?
Yeah. I'd say like more like how you're explaining. I
Hmm.
honestly was very grateful in those companies to not have people being like, I don't like this, or it. I think people were very thoughtful about not just stating opinions. That's, I think, the key
Mm,
differentiator. It's more so like, first off, I love when people do this. They ask questions before stating their feedback. So that's something I actually think I learned from these companies is before you're going to say what you think, like make like vet it first that you fully understand the situation. So
yeah.
people would ask questions and then they'd say, okay, now that I understand this, like I wish, or not I think, but what they're experiencing, or they'd ask about business goals, or collaborators, or things like that. So I think that's something that I learned from those companies that they did very well. Was a very like objective and I think patient approach to feedback and critique.
Mm. Understanding the context where the work's coming from,
Yeah.
which is a mistake I see in a lot of case studies, to be honest, where you'll
Mm-hmm.
read a case study and you'll look at it and you'll think, this work looks kind of average, like it's actually
Mm-hmm.
not all that impressive. And then I'll speak to the person who wrote it and they'll say, oh, yeah, but I had to do this in a day. And I was like, why don't you say that in the case study,
Right.
right? Like that to
Yeah.
me, that's like the most interesting part. And I see
Mm-hmm.
this mistake a lot where people will not put the hiring manager into the shoes of the person doing the work. Well, they'll say,
Mm-hmm.
here's the context. I, was
Right.
the only person working on this. I was put onto this with 1 day notice. I had
Mm-hmm.
36 hours to do it.
Right.
All these sorts of like, and I couldn't use the word blah or, in the final design or something.
Yeah.
Um, I just, yeah, like being able to preemptively answer those questions is so
Mm-hmm.
important. And I think you said these organizations were mature, and asking the questions you're talking about is a
Mm-hmm.
sign of maturity. So
Yeah.
wanting to know like where the person's coming from, what stage of
Mm-hmm.
design is this? What can you talk about your thinking here? Can you take us through your process? What are you
Mm-hmm.
trying to achieve? Like all those just types of baseline questions just help with critique. Rather, I always can tell the difference between like sort of like an early stage sort of design sensibility versus a mature one by just not asking those questions or trying to understand where the designer is at that process.
Mm-hmm. And I think that's something like honestly comes from a place of confidence sometimes. Like talking about the imposter syndrome. I think
Yeah.
if you don't feel secure in your position or knowledge level or things like that, sometimes you feel like that's where I think sometimes you have the I think this or this is this way, more of the opinions because I think people maybe, they're trying to maybe overcompensate because they don't feel the level of confidence that they have in their, roles or experience and they feel like maybe they have to be louder or things like that to show their expertise.
Yeah. Yeah. And also, like, it's not like opinions are bad. Like, everyone can
No.
have an opinion.
Yeah.
It's more just like sort of being aware that it's an opinion. Like, you've seen
Yes.
me. I'll often be like, I have nothing to back this up. So,
Right.
take it with a grain of salt. But I
Yeah.
think blah, and
Mm-hmm.
just saying it, and saying it in a respectful way, I think
Yes.
makes the difference. I think like sometimes like I hear stories about, I don't know why, but Netflix fascinates me because I hear so many of these stories of people who like, the HR director who, you know,
Mm.
was laid off because they're like, cool, you're not sort of like relevant for the team anymore, and so we're going to
Mm.
give you a nice severance package and off you go. And I think sometimes people view view these types of environments as being unkind,
Mm.
or mean, but I think it's more just like they equate it to something like a sports team. If
Mm-hmm.
you think of like an NFL team or um, NBA team or something like that, everyone there takes the game
Yeah.
seriously. They're nice, they're very
Mm-hmm.
nice, but they're there to win,
Right.
and I
Right.
get the sense from what you're describing that working at these companies is very much like that.
Yeah. I think at the end of the day, all these companies are businesses, and I think at different companies you'll feel that to a different degree.
Yeah,
Like a startup where they're like, we're a family. It's like, yeah, but ultimately at the end of the day, we're a business and we have, investors that we need to please. And so I think Netflix is maybe just more transparent about that. We're a
yeah,
business or a sports team. We're here to win. So, buckle up. Um,
yeah. Go win.
yeah,
Yeah,
go win. So,
yeah. I think, and I also think the degrees to it. Obviously, everyone has their tolerance and
mhm.
their preference for what type of environment they're in. But to be honest, like I would prefer a company be upfront with me about like
Yeah.
we're here to win. This is what we're
Hmm.
trying to do, rather than like do the whole like we're a family and then 6 months later be like bye.
Yeah.
Like and because aren't pulling your weight or whatever.
Yeah.
Um, we're coming to the end of our time. It's just flown by.
Yeah.
But I think like you've touched on a lot of like really great points here about like freelancing, and we've talked about how when you're working as a freelancer, there are certain things you just need to be aware of, like business goals, like asking lots of questions. And I think this is good because we're seeing more contract roles come on right now. So this will be really
Hmm.
helpful for people who are going into that type of environment. What's something that we haven't touched on that you think might be relevant for people listening?
This is very broad, but it's in terms of marketing yourself, whether you're looking for a job or using your portfolio, whether you're looking to go freelance. I think the idea of telling a story is underrated.
Hmm.
So, you know, and this how it goes to our value. What we're talking about value too. I think it's less of the I did this or I do this, but it's bringing someone along for the journey of like how you can help them, bringing them in, really kind of telling, it's not I wrote the line of copy. It's, you know, it was we're, had to ship something fast and furiously. I had 36 hours, like exactly what we were talking about. Telling the story of things goes so much further in whatever you're trying to accomplish. I think as humans, we're programmed to like grasp and understand stories and want to hear stories. So it's,
Hmm.
whether you're interviewing for a job, tell the story of the project. Whether you're talking to a potential freelance client, again, like tell a story about, how you can help them.
Hmm.
Don't just tell. Stories are how you show, not tell.
Hmm.
So no matter your goal, tell a story.
Love it. Great advice. So this has been fantastic. Thank you for coming on the podcast. Where can people find you if they would like to connect with you?
Yes, I am on LinkedIn, just Slater Katz, my name. And then also the uxgal.com is where I talk about UX writing and content design.
Excellent. We will link to both of those things. Slater, this has been great. Thank you so much. And I think everyone listening has been given a gift of advice. So I hope everyone listening will be able to go out and get a contract role. But again, thank you so much. This has been great.
Yeah, absolutely. It's been fun.
That's it from me. Thank you for listening to the interview. Once again, if you're interested in any type of training, head to uxcontent.com. You get 20% off with podcast 20, and I'll see you all next time.